Well, welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this session. My name is Brian Beagley, by the way. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Inform 360. We're a technology company in the ethics compliance space. Prior to forming Inform 360, I was the Vice President of Compliance at Johnson Controls, based in sunny and warm Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I do have firsthand knowledge about running an ethics compliance program and the challenges that compliance professionals face in terms of data. I'm joined today by Seth Cohen, Vice President and Counsel of Global Compliance at ADP, Kelly Gordon, Vice President Ethics Compliance at VF Corporation, and Ronnie Can, Director of Global Ethics Compliance at Kimberly-Clark, and I'll have them do a brief introduction here in just a second. I'd like to keep this informal. We certainly welcome any questions from the audience, so please feel free to raise your hand as we go through. This is your panel as much as it is ours, so we're happy to take this conversation in whichever direction you want to take it. We do have a few pre-arranged questions that'll help guide our conversations, but again, we definitely welcome and invite your participation and your questions. So with that, I'm going to ask Seth to just give us a brief introduction about himself, his role, the program at ADP, and then we'll also ask the same of Kelly and Ronnie, and then we'll start off with some additional questions around data.
Hi, everybody. Seth Cohen. Brian gave my title. I've been in the compliance field for maybe 20 years, 25 if you consider my prosecutor days. In between that time and today, I've been, what I like to say, in the in-house world and in the out-house world. So many of you probably know what that's about, consulting and all that other stuff. So at ADP, we have I'm part of the Global Compliance Program, where we have about 29 professionals working on core compliance activities such as myself, as well as privacy and government affairs and so on and so forth. Ethics is actually a separate department. We are both global compliance and global ethics in the legal department at ADP.
I'm Kelly Gordon, and I lead ethics and compliance at VF Corporation. Everybody knows what VF does, who we are? Of course not. All right, how about if I say the North Face, Timberland, Vans? Yeah, I thought I'd get your attention.
We're talking brands, right?
So we're a global company based in Greensboro, North Carolina, very soon to be based in Denver. I'm so excited about the move. We're moving our headquarters to Denver. And actually, I'm excited to be here because data has played a key role in not just the move to Denver, but how I'm restructuring my team with regards to the move. And it's been a really important aspect of how we make decisions. One of the other reasons why data is so important is because even though I'm a lawyer, I don't really enjoy being a lawyer. You know, my passion is women and children, but I needed to make a living to be able to. We were talking about our kids and how expensive they are. So with my passion being women and children, I've been able to use a lot of the data that we've brought through our ethics and compliance program to pursue my passion. So one of the examples is some of the data indicated a need for us to implement a gender-based violence program within our factories. And I was able to use that data to convince supply chain to give me some money. So I'm excited to talk with you about how we're using data at VF, and look forward to getting your questions as well.
Great. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ronnie Can from Kimberly-Clark. Actually, 80% of our customers are women and children. You may know us as the Kleenex company, Huggies, Kotex, Depends. I think at any given time, 1/4 of the entire world is using or has used one of our products. So it's very exciting. Actually, 80% of our customer base is female. And I'll come back to that later as we're talking about data and the importance of that. I've been at Kimberly-Clark now for 2 years. I spent most of my professional life in the outhouse, literally. That's why I'm at a toilet paper company.
I told you, this conversation can go in any direction you want it to go.
After the pool comment this morning, I'm still recovering.
Pee in the pool. Yeah.
So, but this is my first job. I spent about 15 years doing compliance consulting and compliance research. And with all due respect to my consultant colleagues, this job is way harder than it appeared from the outside. I love what I do. We're going through a compliance transformation at Kimberly-Clark. It's been a 2-year journey. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But we've basically rebuilt our entire compliance program rehired everyone, redesigned the structure of the program, and data's played a huge part in that as well.
So I want to start off the conversation this afternoon by asking a very simple question about the state of ethics compliance data in each of your organizations. Now, there's some constraints to this question, and that is take a 5-level maturity model with, let's say, one being, kind of data. When I talk about data, I'm talking about the collection, the analysis, the reporting on it. If you think about it from a maturity standpoint, if 1 is non-existent and 5 is world-class, super stellar, or whatever you want to call it, where would you put your organizations on that spectrum? And start with you, Seth.
Ooh, I'm gonna take a
Middle of the road?
no, use a decimal point if you don't mind, Brian. I'm gonna say about 3.5, and I'll give you the reason for that. And one of the reasons why I asked about if you know ADP is that we are a very data-driven company. We obviously have a lot of data, a lot of perhaps your data, which gives us a lot of pause and concern, and privacy is our top risk. I don't think I'm revealing anything by saying that. So when we think about pulling together data from a compliance program perspective, our board, our executive committee is very focused on metrics, whether it's completion percentages for training, whether it's our employee survey. The reason why I pause is because we all have different names for our employees. We call them associates. So I almost said associate survey, but I meant employee survey. So we use and collect a lot of that data. Can we do a better job? Yes. Are we using technology? In part. We're starting to implement a new technology platform right now. So that's why I say we're not quite at the 5 yet, but I think we're headed in the right direction.
So you stole my answer. So instead of saying 3.5, I'm going to say 3 because we're not a data company.
3.25, 3.7.
I'm going to go
It's
with
like the
3.
price is right. You don't want to go above.
Set the bar
That's
low,
right.
and then okay. So and here's the reason why for us. After we did the prep session, I called our friends at Gardner and I said, "What's this whole deal about maturity matrix for this?" I didn't even
Right.
understand there was one for this particular topic, and so they do have one, and it's very simple. And vendors will always do this stuff for free, and so. We came out at like a 3.5, but I think we're closer to a 3. Here are the elements that we have in place, and it makes me feel a little bit better about what we've been able to do so far. So first of all, we do have a strategy and a vision on data collection, and we have a policy. We actually have on the ethics and compliance team, it's very simple, but a policy about what things we collect and what things we don't, how we protect the data. So that's, I think, important. I think the second thing that takes us to that 3 is our business folks are starting to become our data champions. So when I presented to the board last year, the board was very interested in the data project that we're working on, and our executives are also very interested. And then the third factor that Gartner highlighted for us was there's an increasing amount of integration. So we're going to talk about systems. But when we first started this, we were taking like Excel spreadsheets, and we were using this Microsoft tool that the HR analytics team was using, and now we're starting to use one system to pull all that data together. So we're nowhere near 5, but we're certainly better off than where we were 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's much like being at a buffet when you're hungry. I definitely have an appetite for a 5, but my stomach is saying 2. So we too have aspirations for where we want to take our data. We'll talk more about some of the specifics of it in just a moment. But as I said before, I did a lot of work in a prior career in research, and what I found and what I thought the valuable metrics would be in theory are not the same as the ones in practice. And so really trying to get something very tangible and taking that aspiration of a 5 to something that's practical, that's relevant, is probably where I would say we're at a 3.
So Ronnie, let's stick with you for just a minute. So if we use Simon Sinek and why, let's start with why. So what's driving this inside Kimberly-Clark? Why is there a focus on data, and who's driving it, and who's kind of the most important stakeholder driving it?
Sure. So as I said at the beginning, we're going through a compliance transformation. So we're thinking very differently about how we want to approach compliance, and data is a big part of that. 150-year-old company, Same 4 values since our founding. There's a lot of history there. There's a lot of legacy as to how things need to get done, how we want to go to market, how we want to produce our products. The opportunity for data, though, allows us to turn the conversation around, which says, okay, what are the best ways in which we can think about engaging our leaders to move the organization forward? We have a new CEO as of 2 months ago. We have a new head of strategy. We have a new CFO. You start to do the math of the number of changes that are happening in the corporation. It presented a wonderful opportunity for us to rethink how we wanted to approach data and how we wanted to engage our leaders. The last thing I'll mention just thematically, I've been reading a lot recently about different companies' approaches to data, what they're looking for and why they're using it. I don't know if this is controversial or how other folks are thinking of it, but oftentimes it seems like companies are using data to find that 1%, to find the outliers, to find the defects, if you will, if you think in terms of Six Sigma. We're going the other direction. We're using data to try to help the 99% do their jobs better. And so the kind of data that we're using, the kind of proactive engagement is very much about helping people succeed in their roles, not finding the 1% who are not doing their roles. They may not be able to be identified through data, and they may not even be able to be helped through data. So we want to focus on that 99%.
Kelly, you talked a little bit about how about VF? What's
Yeah,
the
I
drivers?
just feel like you didn't really do a good job of picking a diverse panel because my answer is very similar. And it's written in our plan. The number one thing that we look for in terms of data is engagement. It's all about employee engagement. I mean, of course you use it to analyze risk. Of course you use it to ask for a budget. But what we're trying to do is be more predictive and to also engage with employees. For example, some of the data that we've looked at has told us that unfortunately, when a case is reported by a woman versus a man, it's less likely to be substantiated. Now, it doesn't tell us why, but at least we know we need to look into that. And so, but it does tell me also that I may need to communicate differently or I may need to train differently. And so for us, it's about making our programs stronger, connecting, building trust amongst our associates, and making sure that because obviously with 65,000 employees, we can't talk to each one of them, but how do we create an employee value proposition and a level of engagement that keeps them involved in the company?
So I am going to talk about engagement as well. I'm sorry, but it's a great theme because when we look at our employee survey, and I mentioned it earlier, we have 4 questions. We wish we had 20, but it's always a push-pull. So we have 4 questions. We call them our integrity questions, and you guys could guess. Does ADP have a commitment to culture and all this other stuff? So one of our questions revolved around our managers. And we found some data. When we talk about, looking at where there are issues, we found some data that, certain countries had a little bit of a drop in, how the perception of our managers. And we really dug into that. And the first year we did it, and I sort of ran this initiative, and I'm going to get to the data point in a second.
Absolutely.
But we sort of developed a toolkit. We went to our providers like Gartner and others, and we developed a nice toolkit, and we threw it out there, and our general managers in those countries threw it out there to the managers. But it was very much round. Is it square peg and round hole, or round peg and square? You have to be a good analogist to be a compliance officer, I found. But anyway, this year I think we learned a lot of lessons from what we did last year. And we've really done tailoring to different things. And this is where the data comes in, because we can see trends. We can see, where things went up, and we have countries that went down even despite all of this. So when you think about what data spins out, it spins out information that can help you drive culture and engagement. And I think and there's also indicators that there's something to that number. There's something to a country where presumably business is booming and we've added a lot of employees. And I have one such country, I'm not going to name the country, where the economy in that country is booming, but for some reason, the scores in that country were not doing so well. They dropped. So instead of talking to my fellow legal and compliance people, we actually got together with the HR people, and we dug deep as to what's going on there. And talk about data, we got some more data points there. And we were able to, and we'll find out the results soon enough, we were able to use that data to sort of say, okay, what do we need to do differently this year? So it's a little bit different take on engagement, but I'd say data is pure metrics, which we're certainly, I think, pretty good at with our 3.5 score, but there's also qualitative stuff that you bring in there as well.
Yeah, and I know in my former role at a Fortune 75 company, tagging on to the employee engagement survey, we also observed several false positives. So we found countries and businesses that had very high scoring across all levels, ethics, operations, excuse me, leadership. But it took one hotline call, and the next thing we know, that business was not as sound and as positive as we thought. So sometimes the data can be misleading.
And I think you just brought up, Brian, and I'll give you a second to comment.
Yep.
That I think hotline data is a place where we all go to, and it can be a real.
Right.
There can be false positives
Yep.
there. I mean, you get your leaders asking, well, why don't we have more hotline calls? Why do we have so little? I mean, so it can go in any direction. You can take a data point in any direction you want,
Yep.
but hotline is certainly an area where you can draw a lot of different conclusions, and you sort of have to disabuse your leaders of certain notions when they're looking at
Yeah.
it.
So Kelly, I thought it was interesting what you were saying about the slicing of the data by gender. Is anybody else in the audience doing that with their data? Slicing it by gender to take a look at if you get different results. I think that if you think about the conversation at the gala dinner last night around diversity and excuse me, yeah, age as well.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
That's actually, I don't know if any of you guys are doing it, but I think we're taking a look at the transition from, we have a lot of long-term employees, and they're sort of gradually transitioning out, and you have the millennials coming in, and I mean, again, it's a cultural phenomenon more so than anything else, but if you look at the data points, it reveals some interesting things. I don't know if you guys are looking at that.
Definitely. One thing we're going to talk about, I think, is systems.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think that's why integration is so important, because if anybody uses, I mean, we use Workday, I'm sure some of you do as well, or use a system that's similar. It's interesting what you can feed from those systems into your analysis system to be able to maintain the anonymity that you need to, but to also look at things like age or gender or other factors that you think are important to your program.
Yeah, exactly. Before we go to systems and collecting data, kind of that upfront process, spoiler alert, this is a question that was not on the list, so just I'm throwing you a
Scandal.
curveball straight up. So a lot of companies today have data experts in-house, data scientists, data specialists, especially on the business side of things. If you're handling consumer data, I have to imagine ADP probably has a repository of data specialists. Do you tap into that expertise as you kind of formulate your own strategies around data, or have you thought about that?
Oh, I thought that was just
It can be to
Oh,
anyone.
okay.
I can look at
So we don't have a dedicated data scientist team. We have a lot of folks who know how to manipulate data in our marketing and consumer products. Given the nature of our business, it's very important for us to understand our consumers and their buying patterns. What I will say, and what I be curious, obviously, for your feedback, the skill is not so much how do you run data tables. The skill is how do you interpret it, and what's the judgment that you bring to that information. And this may be counterintuitive, but some of the least mathematical people are the most insightful when it comes to interpreting data. Maybe they have a liberal arts background, maybe they have another sort of non-traditional or non-obvious way of looking at information, and we found that to be particularly helpful.
So I'll add to what I think that's extremely important what you just said. We've seen a trend in data analysts being part of ethics and compliance programs, but we probably don't have the budget to bring someone in. So what we've done is partner with the HR team. How many of you have either HR or finance background? Okay, so, but you know, that within companies, they usually get the money before the rest of us. So we don't have that luxury of having analysts on our teams, but the finance teams and the HR teams do. So we use their data analysts. But the other thing that we've done is redrafted our job descriptions. And at the same time, I've asked for an increase in budget to get training for people on my team. So 2 of the people on my team have actually attended training courses on analytics and data. But back to what you said, interpreting data is important. And then I think the second most important thing is to be able to communicate it well, to be able to tell a story to your leaders so you can take that data and use it to get those resources that you need, or to use it to increase your employee value proposition. So I agree, the interpretation and then the communication of the data is much more important than the actual collection. The collection has been done for centuries and people know how to do that. I think it's really about communicating it that matters.
I think it was interesting, Brian. I forget, and if somebody remembers, refresh my recollection, but one of the speakers this morning said that in a short period of time, there'll be a position entitled a digital compliance officer. I don't.
Yeah,
what-
Microsoft.
Yeah.
It was.
It's Alan.
It was Alan, and I've met Alan before. So, and Alan has been working with data for years and can probably out-talk any of us on this. But I think that's a skill, aside from places like Microsoft, that's coming to a lot of compliance functions. I mean, I hired somebody on my team to be a technology person, a business analyst, but with a focus on technology, to bring technology to the fore, to move us towards a technology tool first of all. And then the way I see that going is harnessing. I mean, we don't necessarily harness our data specialists yet, but we have people on the team who certainly have run, data analytics, who have audit backgrounds and so on and so forth. So your mention of changing the job description certainly resonates. I think in a few years, it probably will be the case that most of us will have somebody who not just has the familiarity with technology, which is maybe our step 1 where we all are now, but step 2 and 3, how to really interpret that data and all of that. Because we're sort of, to your point, Ronnie, I mean, we're sort of liberal arts or science majors who dabble in math.
No, that's exactly right. And I tell you, from the Inform 360 viewpoint, as we interact with a lot of different companies, a lot of different customers, we tend to see more and more this kind of data analytics role, and that was one of our questions that we have is, but we are seeing that more and more. I can draw the same analogy with what I experienced in my professional background around risk management. So 20 years ago, you'd go into, as you know, having worked for Zurich, you go into an insurance department in a large company, and they were mostly insurance people. They weren't data people. But if you go into a large global program today, they will have a data analyst that is evaluating comp claims and GL claims and property valuations and doing the analytical work.
And none of us are in financial services doing that. Some of you may be doing that, analytics on the monitoring transactional stuff that's coming in, and maybe that's pure data right there.
Yeah. So let's talk about the process. So when you think about the different kinds of data that you collect, what are the different ways that you collect it, and kind of who are you interacting with? I assume, especially if you've got a relatively small team, that you're not able to do that all by yourself. So what are the processes and people and teams that you employ to actually collect data within the organization? And I think when we're talking about this, we're looking at, across the program elements, whether it's hotline data, training data, risk assessment data, disclosure data. I mean, we could go on and on around the program element piece of it, but what does that process look like? And maybe Kelly will start with you.
Sure. Our data collection is directly tied to our strategy. So for those of you who lead a program, do you have a program strategy? Do you have objectives and goals? Okay, so we take our data, and the data is directly tied to the strategy. Our strategy is 3 pillars. And so all of the data that we collect leads up to that. And then, of course, we look at things like function and, region and all of the other brands. But when we tie the data to the strategy, then it helps us to make sure that we're focusing on the right areas. So, for example, one of our strategic principles is leveraging leadership engagement. And so for that perspective, we take a lot of information related to our leadership engagement, what people think about our leaders. You talked about that question on your employee engagement survey. How do we take that information, look at gender, look at even race, and how do we look at the program that we've implemented to support that? So my suggestion, and what's helped us to stay grounded and not follow the primrose path, is to stay focused on our strategy for our program and make sure our data funnels up into that.
Ron?
And now you stole my thunder.
Sorry.
No, let me take a slightly different way of looking at it. I totally agree with everything that Kelly said. There are probably, I'll categorize the data collection into three categories. The first is all things survey data. So this could be exit interviews, this could be employee engagement surveys. This past year, one of the things that we did that proved to be really insightful and very humbling was we conducted a Net Promoter Score survey for all people who participated in our helpline process to try to understand if, based on the experience you had, would you recommend the helpline process to a colleague at Kimberly-Clark? That was very insightful. I'll leave it at that. We learned a lot, but I would sort of, that is a survey category of questions. The second category of questions or data I will put is helpline. This could be concerns, this could be questions that come into the helpline, anything where someone is affirmatively engaging the compliance program. So that's a whole category of data collection there. And then our third category, which we're excited about, it's very new, and I hope to have more to share at a future event. But this past year, we just launched an interactive code of conduct. It's not just a PDF online. It literally is an interactive tool where there are training videos, there's links to policies, there's leader messages, there's disclosure forms, basically a one-stop shop for all things that an employee might need to do his or her job more effectively. So I'll put that in the category of how do employees behave in nature? So this is thinking about what do employees do with this resource when no one's looking? So are they clicking on the conflict policy? Are they clicking on the CEO video to understand what the expectations are? And so what we're able to do with that set of information is really collect all sorts of data about what we're just calling, for shorthand, the code clicks. And to use that information to see, okay, what are people looking for or not looking for? And then we take those three different data streams and start to look for correlations in other relationships, all of which is very much in its infancy, but incredibly exciting to think about.
Sonny, question?
On this code fix. Do the people who are taking the code training and making the clicks know that the clicks are being monitored?
They do. So the way we have it set up is I can't track Sunny Cave's code behavior. I can say that in the corporate office, the 20 people who have HR in their title are doing these things. So that's very transparent. And we actually, we share that data with our board of directors. We share that the quarterly CEO leader calls. He has access to that data as well. So we try to let people know we're not looking at you to catch you. We're looking at you to help you.
But you bring up a really good question. I talked earlier about the fact that we, on the ethics and compliance team, before we started this, we created a policy. And if you create the policy up front, then it helps to create or to eliminate the disappointment of going down the path of collecting things and then at the end saying, oops, we forgot to let these people know that we're collecting this data. So I think that's why it's very important up front to take your time, create a policy, think about how you're going to treat the data and how you're going to be transparent with your employees.
Yeah, I'll just add, I'm on a panel later this week at another conference, and the panel's around employee monitoring, and this is the conundrum. Right. On the one hand, we want to be able to track the activities of employees because it gives us valuable information about the compliance program and how we can potentially influence behavior, which is a good thing, right? But if we don't do it in a way that's transparent and open and clear, then we're sending the wrong message to employees about why we're doing it and what's involved. So, and the only thing in conclusion I can come to is transparency is kind of the answer. Takes a lot of different forms, but.
Yeah, I was just, it's interesting. Ronnie sort of jumped ahead. I think we were going to talk about program effectiveness. And you had to use NPS, my favorite three letters. we actually, as a part of the legal department, our legal department runs its own NPS survey, meaning just like.
Does everybody understand
Yeah,
Net
Net Promoter
Score? And if you go talk to your sales and marketing folks,
Right.
they can give you an earful of what the NPS
So yeah,
is.
we our sales and marketing folks run Net Promoter Scores to their clients, what have you.
How do your customers view you?
Right, exactly. So our general counsel said, we're going to run that internally on us and see what the perception is of the legal department. And that includes the compliance function. And we get detailed information about how we're doing, what people think, and it's driven a lot of change because we want to be more efficient. I mean, in a lot of different ways. We want to be more efficient, but also increase the score. And the reason I bring that up is because running an NPS on the hotlines extremely interesting because you're driving into a program element and looking at how successful are we in promoting this, what's the awareness levels. It's a different take on that. But I just wanted to say that we get a lot of data through that, and we've sort of used that to launch other initiatives in the legal department which impact the compliance program. And I'll give you an example. How many of you spend time answering your questions from other companies who are looking at your company, doing a little due diligence about your compliance program?
Yeah.
You get those questionnaires,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's a little bit, we have fun when we're talking to our business people because, they're like, so how are we going to answer this question? Has our company ever had any investigations before?
Maybe.
And I say, don't worry, it's a game. We all give the same answer, which is we're not going to answer, look at our 10K, or whatever.
The answer is, I don't know. What have you heard?
Right. Exactly. So what we did as a legal department is we've developed a database for answering those questions. And I'm on the team I'm on the sort of the 2.0 version of the team this year that is looking at the database, and we're trying to measure how effective is this. And this is kind of not
That's interesting. I'm not aware of any other company I've dealt with that is tracking.
And there's a compliance section of this database which has all the questions you'd think. Do you have an anti-bribery program that people can plug and play? Mm-hmm. And now what we're doing, since we're in sort of year 2 of this, is measuring effectiveness from our salespeople, from the people who respond to RFPs, and seeing, one of the metrics that we're measuring is, did we get that answer on the first try? Meaning, did the client not come back to us, or potential client? If they came back to us, we're putting that down as, hey, maybe that means we need to add something to it. Mm-hmm. So again, a measurement of data that just sort of evolved over the course of time for a little piece of activity that we all do as compliance and ethics professionals, that all of a sudden we can get a sense of how we're doing programmatically.
Right. Yeah. It's that mirror.
Got a question?
Sorry.
Just to add to the point that you said, it's really a fantastic combination to have an environment wherein customers reach out to you to fill in these questionnaires. So now what happens is the business where you want to drive compliance is already aware of the expectation because of the external environment, and it makes it much more easier to drive the point. I wouldn't say that it makes it easier. I'm just saying that it makes it more effective for you to drive that point. In
Right.
that sense, I think that's a very interesting way to look at it. It has a way where even if you want to evolve your compliance from X level to Y level, the external influence helps.
Right.
If you want to actually benchmark it and then use it as a sales factor or marketing factor, if your compliance level is already at Y level compared to some of the customers who are actually reaching out with questionnaires, it also helps in that way. So I
Yeah.
think
Right.
It's a
I mean,
very interesting.
And we get involved in the converse or inverse, which is, if there's an issue with a company we're trying, like a vendor, for example, and there's a red flag, right? They do business in Angola or something like that. Oftentimes, it'll come to us as compliance officers. This is sort of in reverse. People are doing due diligence on us, and we're, by answering those questions, we're sort of raising the awareness level. I get exactly what you're saying. And I think one of the most rewarding things that I do in my job, and I tell people this, is is when clients really get fussy, or potential clients really get fussy, and they're like, these answers just aren't going to cut it. We want to talk to somebody in compliance.
It helps.
And then you're on the phone to talk about adding value. You're on the phone directly with a client or a potential customer with their compliance people, and they're grilling you about, well, what do you do for anti-corruption? How do you do all this stuff?
Right.
And it all
It all
comes from
contributes
that.
to the whole process.
Right. I know we're getting a little bit away from data,
No, because,
but
I
it's
mean,
part of program.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's a reflection piece of that where you're being held accountable.
Right.
You can't. It's not just, hey, we're putting a program together. Take, like it or not. You're basically saying, no, we actually want feedback to tell us what we're doing well, what we're not doing well. So it is another data point.
Because
that
who
groups
are
need to
our
consider.
clients? They're internal clients. They're the people in the business. They're the salespeople. They're the
That's right.
operations people.
I mean, in a way, you're providing the business with a competitive advantage.
Yeah.
Because if the answers are we're not going to give that to you, we don't have any third-party due diligence process, then the chances that customer is going to do business with you are probably greatly reduced.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. Okay, let's talk about tools. So just a real quick piece of information. I don't know how many of you saw the OCEG survey that just came out last week, the 2019 GRC Technology Strategy Survey. Did anybody see that come out from OCEG? If you haven't, pick it up. It's a great document. A lot of charts and graphs about the use of technology in the governance, risk, and compliance space, which would include compliance management. They've got a breakout section on that as well. This was the statistic that jumped out at me the most, and I want to talk about it. Almost 60% of companies still today, and I think they had about 200 respondents, so roughly 200 companies participating in this survey, are still managing their ethics and compliance program using spreadsheets, documents, so Word, PowerPoint, and emails. That was the primary way of basically managing the program. So the question to the panel is, what tools and systems do you use? And we're not trying to identify vendors here or anything like that, just kind of from a process standpoint and from a tool standpoint. Are you using spreadsheets?
Of course. Silly boy.
Is anybody not?
I'm also, though, very excited about the ongoing implementation of a platform system that will pull all of this together. So we took the leap and invested in a system that we think is going to really help us, particularly with that area I talked about earlier, which was about communicating the data and the information and allowing our executives to have access to it. But I also think as we need to not beat ourselves up if we don't have something like that yet, because whatever you present, it's better than what you're presenting now if you're not doing anything. And so while spreadsheets are not the best way, it's a great way to at least start thinking about what you need to report on and what you need to analyze. But yeah, we are implementing a system. We've been doing it for probably the last 8 months, and then the person, unfortunately, who was leading it is taking another job. So we're at a bit of a pause and expect that to pick back up in June. But we're really excited about what it's been able to show us already. So happy to talk one-on-one if anybody has a question about that.
Yeah, and so building on what I had said earlier about our online code, the provider that has helped us build that is the same company that we're using for our helpline, our conflict disclosures, business gratuity disclosures, and so we still very much use spreadsheets. I think PowerPoint actually is our tool of choice, but we do have a single platform that is starting to bring some of this data in. We don't yet have a good visualization tool. I know I heard some folks talk about Tableau earlier today as a way to extract the data and then visualize it. Most of our work is manual, so we're still on that progression. But at least getting started, I think to your point, just getting something going was a big help for us. The hardest part was going from zero to something, not from something to whatever the next thing is. And so now we're on that path.
I'll bring up another oldie but goodie, SharePoint, which obviously has limitations, but is a good data repository. So I'll also say we are on the path of implementing a GRC type tool as well, which I think is really going to advance our program. I will also say that we are in cahoots with or in alignment with our other assurance functions like internal audit, ERM, procurement, what have you. We've started this quote unquote integrated assurance, another one of those fun buzzwords, program where we're aligning on assessment criteria and control criteria and risk taxonomies, all those fun words. And they're using one tool. Procurement is actually using one tool, but we're making sure that all of our tools will talk together, and actually all of that criteria will be the same across. So I think that'll be a real challenge to get that all together, but we're making our way. And I think that over the next couple of years, that'll make things more efficient. Because automation, I think, is where things are going.
So let's talk about today, and before we go on to kind of what we do with the data in terms of reporting to whom and what kind of KPIs and metrics. Again, another curveball question here, it wasn't on the list. If you chunk up kind of the whole data landscape into collecting data, analyzing data, and reporting data, if you rank each of those in terms of where do you today spend the most of your time, how would you rank that?
I would say reporting, and for reasons more of the fact that our executive committee, our board, our audit committee has become, and maybe you've seen this as well, has become much more savvy at digging in and wanting to see the stuff that really counts. So because of that, we're often in refine mode when it comes to those reports. So I think we've got the data they want, but sometimes they want different slices, different views, whatever it is. So it's sort of an interesting answer. I didn't think I was going to answer that way.
So it's a curveball question.
And I'm generally the one who helps our head of compliance with those reports. So I have a little slanted view, but I do think it's a strong indicator of the engagement of our executive committee and our board and audit committee about what they want to see.
Okay. Kelly?
Okay, I want everybody to say something with me out loud.
Take a deep
Count
breath.
of 3. I want you all to say drop downs are my friend. 1, 2, 3.
Drop downs are my friend.
Okay, if you do that, the collect stuff, I mean, and that's obviously oversimplifying it, but with your own data, if you start off by thinking ahead as to what you're going to want to do, what you're going to look at, what you're going to see, you will forever abandon those free-form text fields, and you will look at things more holistically. So if you do that, and if you develop good relationships with internal audit and HR and finance and travel, and which I'm sure all of us are good at some point or another, we have to break down and, make friends with internal audit. I know it's hard, but if you do that, then you will spend most of your time in what I think is a sweet spot, which is the analysis, which is where we are. It's really fun when you see the work that you're doing and the impact of the work that you're doing, and you also kind of see an issue or a problem. A lot of us are problem solvers by nature. The reporting part is actually my least favorite because we have a very engaged board, and as soon as I report something to them, they either give me another project or they drill down on an issue that I did not prepare to discuss. So
Kelly, I want a 60-page PowerPoint on what you just discussed in this one bullet.
exactly,
tomorrow.
that's exactly it. But to be very seriously, if you work on making sure your data is clean and focused and you're thinking ahead up front, you'll get to spend more time on the analysis, which is really where you get most of the benefit from.
Analysis,
Yeah.
all day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
It ties back to the case tool topic that you brought up earlier into the whole collection analysis and reporting. One of the challenges that I have in my company is that I administer our ethics hotline. That's our central repository that we get for ethics-related complaints. We have other stakeholders that have their own platforms, and we're trying to get them on our platform for simplistic purposes, obviously, right? And we rely on them to give us the full scope of what it is that they have on a quarterly basis so that we can do a thorough analysis to present to our conflict of interest committee and our board. But, the challenges of not being on one platform are ever present. So I was curious if you guys had any similar challenges and what you may do to overcome them.
Preaching to the choir here?
Yeah.
I've been with a bunch of different organizations now, and similar sort of issue. I wish there was a good...
Take a look at the OCEG data. You're
Yeah.
right in line with the federated systems with kind of best-in-breed solutions in kind of each functional silo tends to be the majority of the way companies have implemented.
And it gets particularly tricky with the hotline data because what happens? It gets split up between, compliance and ethics, HR and security typically. So, you know, and if you're three, you're using different systems, then, you know, you're pulling teeth to get all the data back together. So, I mean, you can, if your hotline provider has the, you know, initial triage information, but to get the real good stuff, like,
Get the buy-in from the other stakeholders, that's our challenge.
right. We're actually, our ethics department is piloting using the HR tool, because we've been using our own tool, so but it's tricky.
One thought I have on getting the buy-in is perhaps giving them access to the platform system. So maybe that might help with that regards. So VF's a little bit different in that our program is pretty new. So we are all sort of, you know, we kind of all been through this together. So it's a little bit different. But when you have established aspects of your program and then you're trying to get access to their data, it's much more difficult. So one thought is to think about if that's a platform that you all could benefit from, they might be more willing to share their data.
So I just want to recognize we're kind of coming up to the time limit here, but technically we started late, so I'm okay if you all are maybe going over a little bit. Because I have some more questions I'd like to ask, and maybe
Are
you
they
all
on the
do as
list, or
well.
are you gonna?
No, they are on the list.
Okay.
I promise they're on the
We'll
list.
go until we get the high sign.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe just stick real quick with the what you communicate to senior leadership and the board of directors. I mean, what feedback do you get? Do you get any feedback? It sounds like you do get feedback, and it's more of drill down on certain areas that they've been given information and data on. Is that pretty consistent across the organizations?
I think for us, our chief compliance officer presents to the board quarterly, and a lot of the metrics that I described about the helpline and employee engagement surveys and some of these others are all part of that report. I think what I've seen, and maybe this is my thought on the question that was just asked, it's less about a platform or data conversation and more about an engagement conversation. So you don't necessarily need to have a shared platform if you're engaging and having the same kinds of conversations across the organization. It's the same with our board. As much as we try to control what we share, it helps us control the kinds of questions and the follow-up that we get from them. And so why I say the analysis is so important for us is that analysis is done beforehand with the board, sort of so that by the time we get to the board, the full board meeting or the audit committee meeting, people have mostly been brought along to the conversation already, so there's nothing new, there's no surprises. The CEO has gotten a pre-read, the CFO has gotten a pre-read, the general counsel, et cetera. So not to dodge the question,
No,
but we sort of work behind the scenes before the event, so by the time the event happens, it's not an event.
Okay.
I would say, interestingly, in my 20 or so years doing compliance work, that the age of red, yellow, and green seems to be coming to a not an end, but moving to a different sort of thing. I mean, more data, more focused engagement numbers, and how it ties into overall culture. And maybe that's because boards are becoming more sensitive to this stuff.
Would you say the majority of your metrics and KPIs are activity-based? So how many hotline calls do we get? How many people did we train? Are you seeing any kind of effectiveness type of metrics employed?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
So I just want to extend it
Mhm.
from just effectiveness, perception. So some of the metrics may not necessarily work towards, not necessarily be towards effectiveness, but they may be driven towards perception. And these perceptions in certain regions are going to be linked to leadership behaviors. Right?
Yeah.
So if you're looking at surveys, different surveys are going to reflect different types of leadership behaviors, either at a functional level or at the unit level. How do you see that? Because that has a different challenge for you to handle, besides the perspective of looking at employee engagement and ethics and compliance engagement with the larger public. So that is a factor that I would like to understand. Sorry to intervene, but I thought.
No.
I mean, I talked a little bit about, I'll let others bring it up, but, you know, looking at our employee engagement survey, I mean, we get that data on a country-by-country level, and, you know, we've learned, I mean, to summarize what I talked about before, we've learned to dig a little deeper because, you're right, it's generally a reflection of what's happening at the local level. Are there issues with, you know, management? Has there been turnover? How's the business doing? A whole range of factors which you wouldn't necessarily consider as a compliance person, but if you're thinking about culture, it has an impact on if somebody's completing their culture survey and they're like, oh, my general manager in my country, he's a lousy guy or gal, whatever, they're liable to give a lower ranking. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of these surveys, perception is reality. So if an employee believes that there's retaliation, they will not speak up, whether there is in fact retaliation or not. And so I think, it's important as you interpret it, not to necessarily try to find some, objective truth out there. It's more about what is the employee experiencing day in and day out, and if he or she is scared or doesn't think their manager cares or doesn't feel listened to, our compliance program is going to fail.
So it's more about positive influences in the nature.
All right, I've just been told we have 5 minutes, so we do have a little extra time here. Any questions from the audience to the panel? Back here, yes.
Yes, what type of effectiveness metrics are you looking at?
That's a good question.
Are you talking about like related to your actual program? Okay. Our effectiveness metrics are really based on our program self-assessment. So unfortunately, we've not gotten to the point where we're able to say, is our anti-retaliation policy really effective in preventing retaliation? What we look at is our annual self-assessment and whether we're actually pushing through and following through on the program plan. So I know that's not very sophisticated, but that's what we do at VF. So I don't know if you guys have any other comments.
Is that still on? Can we hit pause? No.
Yeah, it's a tough topic.
That's
It's a
right.
very tough
Zone of
topic.
silence. Or zone of silence.
So there are two approaches that we have going on right now. I don't think either is a silver bullet. I've tried for a long time to think about what is a metric that would actually capture effectiveness, and I don't think, at least I haven't found a single one or heard someone who has. So there are two things that we're doing. One is that every other year we run our engagement survey. We have 7 questions, Seth, so we got you there, buddy.
Hey.
So we have 7 questions on our employee engagement survey. One of the questions, though, that we use, it also becomes part of senior executive compensation, is the organizational justice question. So the degree to which employees believe that their concerns will be handled fairly and efficiently. We measure that question every other year. I recognize that it's a survey question which has its limitations, but we try to create a situation where we're driving a culture of integrity that everyone feels responsible for, not just the compliance program. So the idea of I'm heard and I'm listened to and it's handled fairly is an everybody activity, not just a compliance activity. So that's one metric that we're tracking. The survey launches in 2 weeks, so if I'm not here next year, you'll know how our scores turn out.
See, this is a career connection.
This is a big
discussion.
time
That's
career
what I
connection,
keep
yeah.
saying. It's career connection.
If you have a Kimberly-Clark email and would like to complete the survey.
There you go.
That's great.
So that's one dimension, and we do it intentionally every other year because culture takes time, and so we want to have time to intervene and affect it. The other thing that we started doing last year, mixed results, but I'll just put it out there, is so often I had thought about, maybe many of us had thought about compliance is measuring the things that don't happen. That's a hard, the risks that didn't occur because we did something right. We turned that around and we actually have this metric called deliver results. So we're tracking activities that the compliance or the broader legal department engaged in that either led to a positive litigation outcome, that's more of a legal department, or a time savings to the organization, or hours saved, or dollars saved. So we're trying to attach some meaningful business outcome to effectiveness. So it's not did we comply with the federal sentencing guidelines, it's did our collective efforts drive an outcome that the business cares about.
I agree with that, and I think first of all you can sort of turn that question on its head and say it really is a factor of what your, we all know what the sentencing guidelines say, but what your board and audit committee say, and emphasize, and what points do they want? I mean, we have this sort of slide that we show in the deck, in our audit committee deck, that says progress towards maturity. And we have activities that we shade in different colors depending upon where we are. Not red, yellow, green, by the way. But it, but that's sort of our pathway, and they're arguably they're qualitative metrics. But to Ronnie's point, I think what you're doing in terms of showing the things that either didn't happen and the things that led to, I mean, I have a colleague in the room who tracks our productivity metrics. How often do we get involved in direct client interaction because we're filling out those due diligence questionnaires or interacting with the client? How often are they using this questionnaire database? I mean, these are the sort of things that are bringing compliance and ethics functions into the 21st century, really becoming, the metrics are becoming productivity metrics.
Well, and it's also backed by behavioral psychology, which would say that if you want to incentivize employees, whether in the compliance department or broadly, don't focus on the negative outcomes, focus on the positive outcomes, because that'll have a disproportionate impact on employees and anyone really following kind of what you want to have done and how you want to structure things. So you have a better chance of if you ever look into what's called picnic analysis, positive, negative, internal, external, it's all about how you, and we talk about it a lot in compliance conferences like this. It's very difficult to do, so I'm glad we were able to share some examples of how to do that. But it's very important that we can bake in that behavioral psychology piece into what we do. Our time is up. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Thank you to the panel as well. Seth, Kelly, Ronnie, thank you so much.